What if I told you there's a strip of water so small you could drive across it in 3 minutes, and if it closes, your petrol doubles, your groceries get more expensive, stock markets crash, and 1 billion people go deeper into poverty? Not in theory, not in some dystopian movie. It's happening right now, in 2026. This is the Strait of Hormuz, and in the next 7 minutes, I'm going to show you why this one tiny waterway controls the global economy and what it reveals about money, power, and the biggest psychological mistake most people make with their finances. Let's go. Here's what flows through this 33-kilometer strait every single day. 20 million barrels of oil. That's not a lot? Let me give you scale. That is 20% of all the oil consumed on Earth. 1 in every 5 tanks of petrol filled anywhere in the world, whether you're in Karachi, London, Beijing, or New York, traces back to oil that passed through this tiny strip of water. It's also 25% of all seaborne oil trade globally. And if that's not enough, 20% of the world's entire natural gas supply also travels through here, primarily from Qatar, with zero alternative route. Now here's the part that makes this genuinely terrifying. There is almost no bypass. Saudi Arabia and UAE have some pipelines that can reroute oil. But together, those pipelines can handle a maximum of 5.5 million barrels a day. We said 20 million flow through daily. That leaves a 14 million barrel per day gap with absolutely no backup plan. No alternative, no plan B, nothing. For context, that unbridgeable gap is nearly equal to China's entire national oil consumption. The world's biggest importer. Gone. With no solution. One waterway. No backup. 20% of global energy. That's not a choke point. That's a loaded gun pointed at the world economy. In February 2026, when US and Israeli strikes began against Iran, Iran did what it had always threatened to do. It mined the strait, attacked vessels, and declared it closed. The results were instant and brutal. Ship transits collapsed from 130 per day down to just 6, a 95% crash in traffic, almost overnight. Oil prices surged toward $126 per barrel. The $100 threshold, which hadn't been crossed in 4 years, shattered within days. But here's what most people miss. Oil prices are just the beginning. Because oil isn't just petrol at the pump. Oil is the input cost of almost everything you buy. The plastic in your phone. The fertilizer that grows your food. The diesel in the trucks delivering your groceries. The jet fuel flying goods across continents. When oil spikes, everything spikes. That's inflation hitting your pocket directly. And then the natural gas crisis hit Europe and Asia at the same time. Because Qatar, which supplies 14% of Europe's leng, has no other route. Its gas was simply trapped. The UN's trade body UNTAD released a report saying global merchandise trade growth would slow from 4.7% in 2025 down to just 2.5% in 2026. And here's the most haunting line from that report. 3.4 billion people live in countries already spending more on debt than on health or education. These people aren't anywhere near the Strait of Hormuz. But the financial pain found them in weeks. The war is local. The economic damage is global. And it travels at the speed of a price tag. Now here's the question nobody's asking loudly enough. Why did nobody prepare for this? The data was always public. The EIA, military analysts, they've been publishing warnings about Strait of Hormuz vulnerability for decades. It wasn't a secret. It was just ignored. Because of something called normalcy bias, your brain has a default setting that says, if something bad hasn't happened before, it probably won't happen. The strait had never been fully closed in modern history. Not in the Iran-Iraq War. Not during Gulf War I. So the world kept routing 20% of its energy through a single 3-kilometer lane with no real backup because it had always worked before. This exact mental error destroys investors constantly. 2008 housing crash? Experts warned about it for years. But house prices have never crashed nationally. Normalcy bias. Dot-com bubble? Everyone could see the valuations were insane, but tech always goes up. Normalcy bias. COVID supply chain collapse? Pandemic reports existed. But global supply chains don't really fail. Normalcy bias. The Strait of Hormuz is just the largest, most expensive example of this bias in human history. And here's the second lesson, maybe even more powerful. Iran doesn't have the world's largest army. Its economy has been crippled by sanctions for decades. And yet, it has leverage over the entire global economy. Why? Because it controls one coastline of one bottleneck. This is the power of controlling a choke point. Amazon doesn't manufacture anything. It just controls the bottleneck between sellers and buyers. Visa doesn't own your money. It owns the pipe your money flows through. Apple doesn't write most apps. It controls the bottleneck between developers and your iPhone. The most durable power in business and in geopolitics doesn't come from being the biggest. It comes from controlling the choke point. So here's what the Strait of Hormuz is really teaching us. 1. Single points of failure are everywhere. In global supply chains. In your portfolio. In your career. Build backups before you need them, not after. 2. Normalcy bias is your biggest financial enemy. The risks that feel impossible are the ones that wreck you. Not because they're unpredictable. Because your brain refuses to prepare for them. 3. Find your choke point. In business, in investing, in your career. Position yourself where the world has to come through you. That's where real leverage lives. A 33-kilometer strip of water is doing more damage to the global economy right now than any army, any sanction, any policy ever could. Because it's not about size, it's about position. Think about where you're positioned. If this hit different, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you want more of this. See you in the next one.